Have you ever wondered why some patterns keep repeating in your life, even after all your efforts to change? Tonight, we step into a quieter truth, one not written in thoughts, but in the frequencies you unconsciously emit. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let your nervous system soften. This isn't just a video, it's a moment of resonance. You're not here by accident. So before we begin, gently subscribe if you feel this story is already speaking to a part of you that has long been waiting to be seen. And as you listen, feel free to let me know where in the world you're tuning in from, because this field is listening with you. Now picture this. You're not becoming someone new, you're remembering someone true. A self not sculpted by survival, but shaped by coherence. A version of you that doesn't try to manifest from effort, but naturally emits a signal that shapes the world around you. Tonight, we will quietly dissolve the version of you that was built to endure and reattune to the one designed to expand. This is not a motivational talk. This is an activation through awareness, and the field has been waiting for you to arrive. Let's begin. There is a version of you that isn't loud. It doesn't scream for attention, doesn't rise in defense, doesn't even declare its presence. And yet, it is there woven so deeply into your breath, your choices, your stillness, that most days, you don't even know it's operating. You walk into a room and choose a corner instead of the center. You speak only after measuring the emotional temperature of everyone else. You say, "I'm fine," when you're unraveling quietly beneath the words. This self-calm, small, automatic isn't the real you, but it is the practiced one, built in the long corridors of adaptation, formed when your safety depended more on invisibility than authenticity. And now, years later, it whispers through your nervous system as if it's still the only way to survive. But what if survival is no longer the relevant goal? There's a gentle dissonance that begins to rise when your soul outgrows the self that once protected it. It's not traumatic. It's not even painful in the way trauma is. It's more like a quiet ache when you hear your own voice say something you no longer believe. A hesitation when you feel joy too deeply. A quiet pulling back when love comes too close. It shows up as perfectionism, as hesitation, as over-explaining, as saying yes to things that shrink you. But beneath every one of these micro-signals is a deeper resonance, the frequency of an identity that is no longer required, but still rehearsed. This is where the paradox begins. Because this older self, the careful one, the edited one, feels so familiar that you mistake it for truth. And because it feels like you continue to project it into the field of possibility, unaware that the life circling back to you isn't fate, it's a reflection. Not of what you dream about, but of what you consistently signal. And you're not doing this consciously. You're not waking up every morning and deciding to stay small, but you're the sum of your emotions, habits, postures, tones, thoughts, and chemistry broadcasts with a precision that the universe doesn't question. It simply mirrors. Let that sink in. You are not manifesting from thoughts alone. You are materializing from vibration. And vibration is memory, encoded in energy. Not the kind of memory you recall with effort, but the kind your body carries in muscle and movement. The slouch in your spine, the sigh before you speak, the tightening in your chest when possibility arrives. These are all signal, not of who you want to be, but of who you've repeatedly embodied. And unless witnessed, they become the scaffolding of the timeline you keep walking into. So let us pause here not to judge these signals, but to begin witnessing them with gentle precision. Let us ask, who is this self I keep performing? And what need did they once fulfill? Because until that performance becomes conscious, it will govern your life like background music, influencing the pace and mood of your every moment without ever announcing its presence. Here's something most don't realize. The nervous system doesn't just respond to reality, It creates the lens through which reality is filtered. If you once learned that being overlooked was safer than being exposed, your body adapted accordingly. It shaped a field of subtle protection around you. It quieted your truth. It made you pleasing, agreeable, small. Not because you lacked power, but because you were wise. You adapted to what was required for belonging. And in doing so, you created an identity stitched together by necessity, not desire. But here's the beauty. Identities are frequencies, and frequencies can be tuned. You are not broken. You are encoded. And every day you repeat the posture, the tone, the thought pattern of an outdated self. You reinforce the structure of that identity, not because you want to, but because it is familiar. And familiar often feels safer than free. Yet the universe doesn't respond to comfort zones. It responds to coherence. To change your life, then, is not to chase a goal. It is to dissolve the version of you who was wired to avoid it. Not with violence, not with force, but with observation, with breath, with presence. It begins here. Notice the places where your body pulls back when your soul wants to lean in. Notice the moment you censor your opinion before it leaves your lips. Notice the emotion that arises when you consider being seen in your full expression. These aren't flaws. They are frequencies. Echoes of times when you needed to be someone else in order to be okay. And those echoes deserve not your shame, but your thanks. Because that version of you, the quieter one, the agreeable one, the one who shrunk to fit, kept you safe. It got you through. It did its job, but its job is over. You're not just here to survive anymore. You're here to transmit, to become, to emit a signal of truth so unmistakably clear that the field cannot help but reflect it back. That signal isn't built through positive thinking or motivational affirmations. It is stabilized through embodiment. Through being, not just believing. Through aligning your field with the timeline you wish to walk, not from desperation, but from resonance. This is where quantum meets consciousness. You are not pulling your dream life toward you like some object waiting in the distance. You are pulsing out a frequency that either matches that reality or it doesn't. And that match happens not in your willpower, but in your coherence. So ask yourself, when I think about the version of me who already has what I long for, how do they breathe? How do they speak? How do they walk into rooms? How do they hold silence? What do they no longer explain? This is not about becoming them. It's about remembering that you already are when you begin to live from that frequency. Not once, but repeatedly. You change timelines. You shift not only your experience, but the way the universe arranges itself around you. People respond differently. Doors open without effort. Peace arrives uninvited. Not because the world has changed, but because your signal has. And that's the secret. The field doesn't grant you a new life because you ask nicely. It delivers to your frequency with stunning precision. This is why it's not enough to dream. You must dissolve the contradiction. If your desires live in one vibration and your body transmits another, the field reflects confusion. But when you align, when your thoughts, emotions, and nervous system converge into a singular broadcast, you become magnetic. You stabilize. A new attractor pattern. You bend probability into form. And it begins not with doing, but with releasing. Releasing the need to prove. Releasing the attachment to outcome. Releasing the loyalty to a self who is no longer aligned with who you are becoming. This is not erasure. It is reverence. Because your former self wasn't wrong. They were necessary. But necessity is no longer the map. Resonance is. So as we close this first portal in the story, take a moment to notice what stirred in you. Not what you understood intellectually, but what your body recognized emotionally. Did a phrase soften something in your chest? Did a memory flicker that you hadn't visited in years? Did your breath catch at a line that felt too close to truth? Good. That's where we begin. Not with performance, but with presence. You don't need to fight the old self. You only need to stop performing at dot and slowly, with every breath, every new choice, every softened moment of observation, you step into a different signal. One the field already knows how to mirror. There's a moment of quiet, private moment when something inside you gently begins to wonder, what if I no longer need to prepare for collapse? What if I no longer need to speak through a mask so others feel comfortable around my truth? The question doesn't arrive with fanfare. It slips in softly, like light through old curtains. It's not a declaration. It's a pause. And in that pause, a space opens wide enough for a different kind of knowing to emerge, not the intellectual kind, but the felt kind, the knowing that speaks in warmth along your spine, or the slowing of your heart after a long internal battle. You've arrived at this threshold not because you've failed, but because your signal is finally catching up to who you've always been beneath the performance of safety. And now the body must learn what the soul already knows. You don't have to be who you were to be, who you are becoming. But that transition isn't always clean. The body doesn't instantly drop its conditioning just because your mind glimpses a new way. No, it holds on a little longer. It tests. It flinches. It remembers. You feel it when you hesitate before sharing something vulnerable. You feel it when your throat tightens before you speak truth into a room not used to hearing it. You feel it when your chest burns not from fear, but from unfamiliar openness. These sensations are not regressions. They're recalibrations. Your body isn't sabotaging your growth. It's updating its wiring dot, and here lies one of the most tender misunderstandings in transformation. The belief that your old responses mean you haven't evolved. In truth, they often signal the opposite. Your awareness has increased. Your frequency is rising. And now your system is detoxing what no longer belongs. This is what quantum coherence looks like in real time. It's not smooth. It's honest. You must allow space for the discomfort of new alignment, because embodying a new self doesn't mean the old self vanishes overnight. That version of you, the one built on vigilance, delay, caution, and smallness, wasn't simply a mistake. It was brilliant. It was adaptive. It was, in a way, sacred. It shaped its frequency not out of desire, but necessity. And so you must release it the same way, not with disdain, but with reverence. Imagine this, your past self sitting beside you in a quiet room, not younger in age, but coated in caution, their hands folded, their posture curled, their voice hesitant. And now you, the you who's remembering, sit across from them. You don't lecture. You don't correct. You place a hand gently over theirs and whisper, "Thank you. You don't have to hold this anymore." That act pure presence without judgment collapses the loop. Why? Because presence is the only force strong enough to dissolve a pattern without reinforcing it. This is the frequency shift most people miss. They try to override old programs with intensity, with urgency, with rules, but urgency is still fear in costume. Real transformation doesn't pressure, it invites. And the field this vast, responsive quantum sea only reshapes when you stop performing and start vibrating from peace. Now pause. Ask yourself softly, what is the emotional chemistry I live in most often? Not what you aspire to feel, but what your cells are swimming in day after day. Is it urgency, doubt, waiting, or is it openness, calm, trust? Because your dominant emotional state is your tuning fork. It conditions your field. It signals the timeline that collapses around you. So if your words say, "I want freedom," but your body says, "I'm still not safe," the field will mirror the body, not the wish. And yet here's the gentler miracle. The body can be retuned, not forced, not trained, but listened to, held, felt. When you start greeting your hesitation with curiosity instead of criticism, something shifts. The signal clears. The field hears. This doesn't mean you'll never flinch again. It means your flinch won't define your identity. It becomes a visitor, not a home. From this space, a different life begins to crystallize, not because you chased it, but because you stopped interfering with the signal that already matched it. This is what coherence does. It draws experience with minimal resistance, not because it is magic, but because it is clean. Imagine again, walking into your day, not hoping for transformation, but exhaling into it. Imagine making choices not from habit, but from resonance. You reach for food, for conversation, for rest, not from anxiety, but from attunement. Your preferences shift, not because a coach told you to, but because your chemistry no longer craves reinforcement of the past. The very nature of your desire changes. You want simpler things, truer things. You want environments that match your breath, not your fear. You want conversations that stretch your imagination, not tighten your chest. You become selective not as a performance of self-worth, but because your frequency now acts as its own boundary. This is the forgotten art of being, choosing from signal, not from story. And as this becomes your new default, strange things start to happen. Not strange in a supernatural sense, but strange in how natural they feel after a lifetime of effort. You think of someone and they message you. You stop chasing and things begin to arrive. You feel called to go somewhere, and there's meaning waiting there for you. These are not miracles. These are harmonics. The field is not late. It's exact, but it only listens to signal, and signal is not a wish. It's a state. So the question is no longer, how do I get there? The question becomes, what in me is still emitting the frequency of not there? And not with shame, but with soft awareness. Because once you see the signal, you can gently let it go. You may even feel grief, das grief, because the self you're leaving behind was not all pain. It had triumphs, rituals, familiarities, people who knew how to love it, but not you. And letting go of that self can feel like betrayal. But it is not betrayal, it is liberation. And the people who truly see you will adjust. Or they won't, but you will remain clearer, lighter, truer. In this stage of remembering, things may fall away. Relationships may shift. Habits may resist. And the nervous system may attempt to return to the old loop. That's okay. Repetition is not regression. It's invitation. Each time you notice, you return. And each return weakens the old broadcast. Until one day it's just background static. Until one day your presence is louder than your programming. And then you arrive. Not in a place, but in a rhythm. You move through life with an internal ease, not because life is easy, but because your signal no longer argues with it. You are not reacting. You are composing. You are not guarding. You are radiating. You are not waiting. You are transmitting. And that changes everything, not all at once, but in a momentum that cannot be reversed. You start to feel real time. Feedback from the field. Someone gives you an opportunity you didn't ask for. A stranger echoes back a truth you just began to believe. A new idea blooms where doubt once lived. These are not random. They are returns, echoes of coherence. The field answering back in your new language. And still, you will wobble. You'll wake up in the old fear. You'll catch yourself holding back. You'll want to retreat. But this time, you'll notice. You'll breathe. And you'll speak to yourself not like a project, but like a loved one. And in that gentleness, the frequency realigns. You'll return not to the past, but to the signal you now know how to hold. And from here, something ancient begins to stir. Not just new outcomes, but new instincts. You'll say no without guilt. Yes, without overthinking. You'll pause without panic. Act without apology. Not because you practiced, because your field now emits the truth, without friction. You've become what you once hoped to find. And the old self? Still part of the story. Still echoing in faint memories, but no longer driving the signal. It now sleeps in peace, folded gently into your timeline, as a chapter once necessary, now complete. There comes a threshold in the recalibration of your life where something profound yet nearly imperceptible begins to occur. It is not marked by fireworks or great declarations. It is marked by absence. The absence of tension where there used to be tightness. The absence of shame in places once layered with apology. The absence of a narrative explaining your worth. These disappearances don't scream. They evaporate. And suddenly, there is space, real spacious presence where survival used to live. You don't notice it at first. It feels strange, almost hollow. But then you realize the echo of the self you used to perform has grown faint. You're not resisting joy anymore. You're not overthinking peace. You're not rehearsing yourself before every interaction. You are arriving without defense. And that quiet ease is the true indicator that your frequency has changed. But it's not just ease. It's intimacy with life, with others, and most importantly, with yourself. There is no longer a filter between your truth and your actions. You speak and your voice doesn't tremble. You rest and no longer feel guilt. You feel inspired without the panic of urgency. You begin to recognize yourself in new ways, not as a reaction to your environment, but as a tuning fork for it. And your environments begin to respond. Rooms open. Conversations deepen. The field that once mirrored your guardedness now mirrors your coherence. What you feel inside, you now see outside. Here's the miracle buried in that exchange. You are no longer performing transformation. You are simply resonating your nature. And resonance doesn't convince. It confirms. The people you meet feel something around you but can't name it. It's the stillness in your eyes, the gentleness in your rhythm, the steadiness of your choices. You're not trying to be anything. You've simply stopped suppressing what you are. This is what embodiment means. It's not about being perfect. It's about being whole. And wholeness is not the absence of pain. It is the integration of all parts, held without shame. Even the scared parts. Even the old voices. They still visit, but now you recognize them. You no longer believe them. You don't argue. You don't collapse. You witness and gently, they dissolve. At this stage of your evolution, the inner shifts become subtler but more impactful. You begin to feel the energy of a room before a word is spoken. You sense when something resonates and when something contracts you. You make choices from sensation, not mental strategy. And yet those choices produce clarity, alignment, flow. The timelines that once seemed impossible become mundane. You don't even celebrate them. You simply walk into them because they match your signal. And what about desire? It matures. Desire no longer comes from lack. It doesn't arrive with grasping. It arrives like a whisper, soft, sacred, curious. You want what's true, not what's impressive. You want connection, not performance. You want freedom, not achievement. And your wanting doesn't sting. It glows. Now, let's speak of the days when the glow dims, because they will come. You awaken an old emotion, an old fear, an old belief, not because you failed, but because the nervous system, like a forest after fire, still carries the memory of dry seasons. On those days, you return to slowness. You don't analyze. You don't label it regression. You place a hand over your heart and remember, I am safe, even now, especially now. And something beautiful happens. The emotional weather passes faster. the body trusts sooner. Your new baseline pulls you back more quickly. This is quantum stability, not perfection, but gravitational coherence. Others will notice, but they may not understand. Some will feel unsafe around your peace, not because you've hurt them, but because your resonance highlights the dissonance in their own field. This is not your burden. You don't have to shrink to soothe. You don't have to explain your frequency to those not ready to hear it. You just stay steady. Your signal will find its match. And in time, those who once feared your change may feel drawn to it, because frequency doesn't preach. It invites. This is how silent leadership begins. You become a lighthouse, not by screaming into the storm, but by being a fixed point of coherence. Others navigate by your presence, not because you instruct, but because you exist clearly. At this point, even your past begins to reshape. Memory itself is vibrational. When your frequency changes, what you remember and how you relate to it changes too. Old stories soften. Former wounds feel further away. You no longer identify as the one who was hurt. You identify as the one who healed. And this shift isn't delusion, it's permission. The permission to stop rehearsing pain and begin transmitting peace. That peace ripples, not just in your relationships, but in how you see time, space, even purpose. The pressure to figure it all out melts. You stop asking for guarantees. You begin asking more beautiful questions. What's calling me now? What would bring me alive in this moment? What frequency feels like truth? And you begin to trust the answers that arise, not because they are certain, but because they are resonant. You live less from planning and more from presence. You don't abandon logic, you expand it. You make space for magic without forcing it. You allow reality to become participatory, not fixed. You're co-creating not from control, but from invitation. This is when the body becomes a true instrument. You feel when something is off before the facts arrive. You sense when you're out of tune, not as failure, but as feedback. You notice when you're repeating an old emotional pattern, and you pause not to fix, but to recalibrate. And the recalibration is quick. Breath, stillness, attention. And just like that, you're back in signal. From here, even your identity softens. You no longer need labels to feel real. You're not attached to being spiritual or healed or successful. You are becoming more essence, less image. People ask who you are, and the most honest answer becomes present. You've stopped chasing outcomes. You've started tuning to truth, and the results? They're undeniable, but they're not flashy. They're subtle. You sleep better. You smile without performance. You make decisions without spiraling. You move through conflict without losing your center. These aren't small wins. These are quantum shifts. You've become the one who no longer needs to prove, to push, to protect. You simply emit. And what you emit, life reflects. But perhaps the most sacred shift is this. Your sensitivity, once seen as a burden, is now your superpower. You feel more, but suffer less. You notice more, but judge less. You receive more, but grip less. This is the paradox of alignment. As you open, you become both softer and stronger. Not guarded, but grounded. You don't need a script to feel safe. Your frequency has become your shield. You walk through the world with an invisible flame, not to burn others, but to stay lit inside your own path. And even when darkness comes, you are no longer afraid, because the field inside you is clear. And that clarity is more trustworthy than any external condition. This is not the end of your journey. It's the stabilization of a new chapter. A chapter where you're not seeking transformation, but living as it. A chapter where every step forward is less about force and more about flow. A chapter where coherence is your compass, not your reward, and the field listens. always. By now, something in you has changed, not because you've added new beliefs, but because you've begun releasing the ones you didn't realize you were carrying. The field around you feels subtly different, as if life itself is breathing more gently in your direction. You're no longer trying to command transformation with willpower alone. You are allowing it to echo outward from your coherence. You no longer ask, "How do I become that future version of me?" Because you've begun to understand that version already exists. Your task was never to become it, was to remember. And remembering isn't mental. It's vibrational. It's a return not to facts, but to feeling. And that feeling isn't always joyful. Sometimes it's solemn. Sometimes it arrives with tears. Because when you remember your essence, you also feel the years you lived apart from it. But even that grief is sacred. It is the moment when the signal returns to its rightful station. It is the sound of your frequency reclaiming itself from old noise. Now, everything becomes an act of attunement. Not a task, but a devotion. The way you wake up, the way you move through a room, the way you drink water or speak your name. These are no longer moments of unconscious motion. They become rituals of resonance. You are not just inhabiting a body. You are shaping reality from within it. Your body becomes your tuning device. Your breath becomes your dial, and your presence becomes the most advanced technology you will ever carry. From this place, you begin to live what the mystics have whispered and the physicists have begun to prove. Reality is not a place you go. It is a field you participate in. And the more coherent your signal, the more organized the field becomes around you. That organization might look like luck, like flow, like timing too perfect to be coincidence. But it is none of those things. It is you finally aligned with yourself, Dot. There is a deeper beauty emerging now, one that isn't measured in goals, but in gravity. You no longer chase, you attract. Not people or outcomes, but clarity, stability, harmony, and that harmony radiates. People feel it when they sit beside you. They don't know why they feel calmer, but they do. They don't know why their voice slows, or why their truth slips out more easily, but they trust you. You're not performing peace. You've become it. You've become safe to be around, not because you've mastered every emotion, but because you don't abandon yourself when they arise. You don't flinch from your own sadness. You don't hide your joy. You don't dilute your intuition just to remain relatable. You are no longer loyal to comfort. You are loyal to coherence. And the field rewards that loyalty with miracles, disguised as ordinary moments. You walk into spaces and feel energy before you speak. You feel if a choice contracts you or expands you. You feel if a person's frequency is resonant or misaligned. But you don't judge. You don't label. You simply notice. This is not sensitivity. It's sacred perception. And perception, when clean, becomes power. That power does not dominate. It harmonizes. It does not force. It invites. And so your presence becomes a doorway. People step through you into themselves. They borrow your signal until they find their own. And you let them. Not because you are responsible for their awakening, but because coherence is generous by nature. You'll notice, too, that the old cravings fade. The craving to be seen, to be validated, to be understood. These once felt like survival needs. But now, they dissolve not because you've been filled from the outside, but because you've reconnected to the source within. You don't need someone else to see you in order to feel real. You don't require agreement to feel whole. You've made peace with being unexplainable to others because you are no longer a translation. You are a frequency, and in that frequency, your life becomes strangely elegant. You don't wrestle decisions anymore. You feel them. You don't explain your boundaries. They are self-evident in your vibration. You don't hustle for outcomes, you align with timelines. The very laws that once felt external begin to feel like collaborators. Gravity, time, flow, they bend gently to coherent intent. But none of this means you float through life untouched. Pain still visits. Doubt still knocks. But your relationship to them is new. You no longer collapse into discomfort. You expand to hold it. You don't resist shadow, you integrate it. You don't fix yourself, you remember that wholeness was never lost, and so your language changes. You speak less of healing, more of remembering, less of hustle, more of harmony, less of fixing, more of frequency. These are not semantics. They are calibrations. They represent the geometry of your consciousness, reorganizing itself around truth. As you continue living in this new coherence, you'll begin to feel time differently. It stretches. It compresses. You no longer live by the tyranny of urgency. You respond to rhythm, not rush. And in that rhythm, synchronicity blooms, not as spectacle, but as structure. The right person calls. The exact idea arrives. The opportunity you forgot you dreamed about whispers. I'm here. You feel awe but no longer surprise. Because part of you always knew this was possible. Not because it was predicted, but because it was prepared for. By you. By the version of you who waited patiently beneath the surface, humming with readiness. Now, even silence becomes a friend. You no longer fill it with explanation or effort. You rest inside it. You let it speak. Because silence, like space, is not emptiness. It is the medium through which new timelines take root. And you are no longer afraid to pause. You know now? Nothing real can pass you by. What is meant for your signal cannot miss its resonance point. And perhaps most beautifully, you become playful again. You flirt with possibility. You dance with the unknown. You stop needing to earn joy. You accept it as your native tone. You laugh more, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer tense around the unpredictable. You trust the field, and it trusts you. This is the living frequency of freedom. It is not a destination. It is a declaration. A declaration not spoken, but lived. In the way you hold your gaze. In the way you say no without guilt. In the way you offer love without needing it returned. In the way you stand quietly in your full selfhood, unafraid, unshrinking, unedited. And the old self? It still appears sometimes in dreams, in reflexes, in echoes. But now you know what to do. You place a hand on your heart and say, I know you're trying to protect me, but I am safe now. You can rest, and the body listens. The breath returns. The signal steadies. This is the final evolution of transformation, not into a new self, but into the you who never needed to be constructed. The one who is always humming beneath the static. The one who wasn't a concept, but a tone. You become recognizable to yourself again, not as a role, not as a story, as a field. And in that field, others begin to awaken too, not through instruction, but through resonance. Because when one being rises into coherence, it lifts the signal for all. You are not just living a better life. You are singing a clearer signal. And life is listening. By this point in your unfolding, it becomes clear. You were never chasing a better version of yourself. You were simply returning to the one that didn't need translation. The one that knew how to breathe before the world taught you to hold your breath. The one that felt the rhythm of truth before words were assigned to worth. You realize you are not a self-improvement project. You are a field remembering its original frequency. And the echo of that remembering now reaches beyond you. It begins to touch everything around you. Like a tuning fork struck gently in a quiet room, your resonance travels. It doesn't announce itself. It just moves. and things respond. You begin noticing that people around you shift without you needing to intervene. Some soften in your presence, some fall silent, some walk away, and all of it feels okay. You no longer personalize their reactions. You understand. Now that your coherence isn't always comfortable to those still navigating noise. But that discomfort is part of the invitation. You are not here to be a mirror for their stories. You are here to be a portal for their remembering, whether they accept the invitation or not. There is a kind of compassion that arises from this awareness. Not the performance of kindness, but the actual frequency of it. You stop reacting to the pain of others as if it's your job to fix it. Instead, you witness it. You hold space. You transmit presence. And sometimes that is more powerful than any solution you could offer. Because presence, when pure, reorganizes chaos. It does not need words. It does not require agreement. It only needs to be sustained. And you have become the kind of being who can sustain it. You know the landscape of your own shadows well enough now that you're no longer frightened when someone else's storms pass through. You no longer take offense at projections. You no longer collapse under tension. You simply feel. You breathe. You hold the signal. This is what the awakened nervous system can do. It no longer seeks to defend against reality. It becomes reality's quiet co-creator. And that creation begins within. Your biology, once addicted to cycles of alarm and anticipation, now begins to stabilize around neutrality. Your organs operate in peace. Your thoughts slow their spin. Your heartbeat holds steady in places that once triggered you. This isn't because you've mastered all emotions. It's because you've made space for them. You've ended the war with your own internal weather. And that ending changes everything. You begin to attract from a different field. Not one based on urgency or unmet need, but on alignment. What comes into your life now doesn't require convincing. It meets you already in signal. People, opportunities, ideas, they arrive already aware of your frequency. And if they're not a match, they dissolve without conflict. Not because you push them away, but because your field no longer magnetizes confusion. This isn't isolation. It's refinement. You don't need constant company to feel whole. You don't require validation to know you're on course. You move with the trust of someone who has become their own feedback loop. The field and your body are now in intimate conversation. When something resonates, you feel it immediately. When something contracts, you don't need to analyze you. Simply choose again. This level of clarity once felt like a goal. Now it feels like home. And home is not a place you live. It's a frequency you inhabit. You carry that frequency into everything you do, into how you eat, into how you listen, into how you set boundaries, into how you imagine the future, even into how you end things. Because now, endings don't feel like failures. They feel like recalibrations. You no longer mourn every exit. You understand the sacred logic of the field. What doesn't match your coherence cannot sustain proximity. And you bless it as it moves away. From here, time becomes pliable. Hours stretch or collapse based on your alignment. Synchronicities cluster around moments of clarity. You say something, and it's echoed back within minutes. You dream of someone, and they message you. You take a risk, and the support appears before doubt can catch up. This is not superstition. It is signal behavior. The quantum field is listening not to your words, but to your calibration. And now you know how to tune. When fear rises, you don't suppress it. You breathe it into coherence. When uncertainty knocks, you open the door without armor. When old identities whisper their nostalgia, you smile and say, "Thank you, but I live elsewhere now." This is not disassociation. It is discernment. You are no longer loyal to stories that cost you your frequency. Even your creative power expands. You don't try to be original, you simply become attuned. And in that attunement, ideas arrive, already complete, not from effort, but from permission. You create not to prove something, but to emit something. Your art, your words, your work, these are not performances. They are frequencies dressed in form God, and this frequency is contagious. Without trying, you start to notice people asking you what changed. They say things like, "You seem different," or "It's calming to be around you," or "I don't know why, but I feel better when we talk." And you smile not to take credit, but because you recognize what's happening. They're nervous. Systems are remembering something too. They are feeling the invitation. You are no longer just transforming your life. You are participating in a collective coherence event. Each being that awakens to their true frequency sends ripples through the field, and those ripples activate codes in others. This is not metaphor. It is mechanics. Human consciousness, when aligned with itself, becomes a tuning mechanism for the whole. So you live differently now, not because you're better, but because you're available. Available to joy, to clarity, to connection, to silence, to growth that doesn't come through pain, but through grace. And when pain does visit, you meet it with such compassion that it has no choice but to transmute. This is the final evidence of integration. Peace that no longer needs a reason. You can walk into uncertainty and remain soft. You can hold contrast and remain steady. You can speak truth without trembling. You can love without possession. You can leave without closing. You can return without shame. You can exist fully, freely, coherently. And when you do, the field celebrates, not with noise, but precision. You notice it in the softness of strangers, in the timing of events, in the peace of mornings, in the depth of sleep, in the way life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a ceremony. Is the life that arrives not through striving, but through signal. And when others ask you how you did it, you won't have a script. You'll just offer a smile, a breath, maybe a pause. Because how can you explain what it feels like to remember something the world convinced you to forget? How can you describe the moment you stopped reaching and started resonating? You'll simply live it. And that will be enough. Because the self you no longer need, no longer leads. You are the signal now. And the signal is clear. By now, the question is no longer, how do I change? The question dissolves into something deeper, something subtler. It becomes, how do I remain true to the frequency that already knows? This question does not demand answers. It invites listening. And in that listening, you realize that the journey was never about becoming more. It was about becoming less, a shedding, an unlearning, a gentle retreat from everything you believed you had to be in order to be enough. And what remains after the shedding? Not a blank slate, but a luminous core. A self not sculpted, but revealed. This self doesn't push. It pulses. It doesn't chase. It harmonizes. And from that harmony, your entire life begins to hum with quiet precision. You move through the world with different footsteps now. You are not in a rush. Time follows you. Choices come with clarity. And even when they don't, you no longer panic. You understand that confusion isn't the enemy. It's the space between signals. It's the pause before alignment. You trust the pause now. You rest in the unknown. You let life breathe between chapters instead of forcing the next page. This is the maturity of frequency, not in age, but in presence. You have become present in a way that alters everything without needing to change anything. And it shows that your breath is different, slower, fuller. It no longer carries the tremor of unspoken fear. It no longer prepares for rejection or interruption. It simply flows, and as it flows, your nervous system listens. Your cells soften, your mind steadies. The very chemistry of your body recalibrates to match the peace you no longer seek but inhabit. You have exited the emergency broadcast system. You now emit a calm so deep, even your past begins to reconfigure around it. And yes, the past does change not in content, but in texture. You remember things differently now. You no longer tell stories from the place of wounds. You tell them from wisdom. You don't say, "This broke me." You say, "This revealed me." You don't speak to be pitied. You speak to be clear. You don't rehearse pain to stay interesting. You become interesting because your presence is undivided. This subtle shift echoes across your timelines. Old shame dissipates. Old regret loses its grip. You stop needing to rewrite history because you've updated the signal it once wrote into your field. And this updated signal becomes your legacy. Not a legacy of accomplishment, but a frequency. You begin to realize that how you exist is more influential than anything you produce. The tone of your presence, the quality of your silence, the coherence of your field, these become the gifts you offer to the people around you. You don't need them to understand it. You don't need applause. The shift in energy is enough. Because energy, unlike ego, leaves real imprints. So your life becomes a series of subtle imprints. A smile that disarms someone's panic. A moment of pause that diffuses a spiral. A glance that says, "I see you," even when no words are exchanged. You no longer need to save others. You simply remain clear enough that they remember how to return to themselves. You don't call this leadership. You call it love. The kind of love that holds without holding on. That witnesses without needing to fix. That trusts timing over tactics. And speaking of timing, yours is now exquisite. You move when it's time, not when it's trendy. You act when your signal says yes, not when the world says now. You rest even when the culture says grind. You speak only when your words carry resonance, not noise. And somehow, things still work out. Better, in fact. Because alignment isn't late, it's just accurate. This accuracy begins to rewire your entire experience of manifestation. You no longer ask from lack. You emit from truth. You don't visualize to escape. You feel to stabilize. Your dreams no longer live in the distance. They live inside your frequency, already communicating with timelines you cannot yet see. And every moment you live in that frequency is a vote for their arrival. This is not delusion. It is discipline. Not the discipline of control, but of clarity. You no longer indulge in chaos. You don't dramatize your growth. You don't romanticize struggle. You have nothing to prove. You've replaced the rush of adrenaline with the depth of attunement. And from that attunement, miracles become logical. Even your pain feels different now. When it comes, and it still comes, it does not drown you. It passes through, respected but not worshipped. You no longer define yourself by what hurts. You define yourself by what heals. Pain may visit, but it does not stay. It finds no echo chamber in your field. You've closed the loop. You've emptied the room. You begin to recognize yourself as a space, not a structure. You are not a set of beliefs. You are not your habits. You are not your preferences or projections. You are a spacious awareness moving through a temporary costume. That costume still matters. It still speaks, but it no longer commands. It no longer pretends to be the source. You've found the source, and you live from it. This is not perfection. This is precision. And precision is powerful, not because it dominates, but because it doesn't waste energy. You don't waste your light explaining it to those committed to misunderstanding. You don't explain boundaries, you embody them. You don't seek justice, you emit balance. You don't seek love, you become the field in which love feels. Safe to land. And now, even your dreams evolve. You don't want what the old self wanted. Not because those desires were wrong, but because they were encoded in contraction. Now you want expansion, spaciousness, sincerity. You want to laugh in ways that heal timelines. You want to sit in stillness that echoes for generations. You want relationships that don't need fixing, just witnessing. You want beauty that doesn't need a filter. You want purpose that doesn't need applause. And you get all of it, not because you chased it, but because your frequency called it home. This is the essence of reality design. You are not bending the universe to your will. You are aligning with the version of it that was already waiting for your coherence. You are tuning yourself again and again until the reflection is unmistakable. And in that reflection, you find others, not because you looked for them, but because resonance does not isolate. It attracts quietly, powerfully. You find the others who remember the field. You build not communities, but constellations. Each of you shining from your own calibration, contributing light, not ego. And together, you illuminate what the world forgot. That peace is not passive. It is potent. That softness is not weakness. It is strategy. That coherence is not retreat. It is revolution. And now you are the revolution. A quiet one. A steady one. One that won't trend on social media, but will shape the future. Because the future doesn't belong to the loudest, it belongs to the clearest. And you are clear now. The self you no longer need may still knock from time to time, but it no longer wears your name. It no longer speaks your truth. It no longer lives in your field. You can hear it and smile, not with regret, but with reverence, because it did its job. It brought you here, but you are no longer that. Echo. You are the sound the field has been waiting for. You are the clarity beneath centuries of noise. You are coherence made flesh. And now, as the breath settles and the echoes fade, you sit inside a new kind of silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of signal. A clarity without effort, a truth without tension. You are no longer seeking the next breakthrough, because the space you now occupy is no longer built on seeking, but on being. You wake each morning not asking, "What must I fix?" but feeling, "What will I harmonize today?" And when fear arrives, as it sometimes will, you greet it like an old story you've already outgrown. No shame, no resistance, just remembrance. You are no longer made of reaction. You are made of resonance. And this resonance, steady and unmistakable, becomes your real identity. Not the one given by survival, but the one revealed by coherence. So now you walk forward, not to escape the past, but to embody the signal that reshaped it. Subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time. And remember, other stories are also waiting for you, gently tuned to your awakening.